I'm 60 years old, and for most of my life I believed I understood danger. I served 37 years in the Bundeswehr. I've walked patrols in Kosovo, Afghanistan, and places no one ever writes postcards from. I've heard mortars whistle in the night and felt the ground shake beneath armored convoys. I thought I knew what fear was. I thought I understood how it sounded in the chest, how it tightened the throat, but the forest taught me something different. This happened last autumn in the southern reaches of the Black Forest, not far from the French border. The tourists were mostly gone by then. The trees were heavy with damp leaves, the trails soft with rot and fallen needles. I had taken to hiking alone since retirement. My wife passed 3 years ago, and the silence in our house in Freiburg had grown louder than artillery. The forest, at least, had a natural silence. It didn't pity me. That morning was cold but clear. A thin fog clung low between the pines, and the air smelled of wet bark and mushrooms pushing through soil. I remember pausing at the trailhead, adjusting the straps of my old military rucksack. Yes, I still use it, and taking a long breath. It tasted metallic and earthy. Familiar, grounded. I wasn't hunting. I carried no rifle, just a walking stick, a folding knife, a basic first aid kit, water, and a whistle. Old habits die hard. Even in peace, I prepare. The deeper I walked, the quieter it became. The Black Forest has a way of swallowing sound. The spruce trees grow thick and tall, their branches knitting together overhead like ribs. The forest floor was soft, almost spongy. My boots sank slightly with each step. I could hear the faint crunch of twigs, the distant tapping of a woodpecker, and my own breathing. Slow, steady, controlled. I remember noticing the tracks first. At first glance, they looked like deer prints pressed into the mud near a shallow stream. But when I crouched and brushed the soil aside, I saw the split hooves were wider, deeper, the edges sharper, fresh, wild boar. In Germany, they're not rare. In fact, they're everywhere. Farmers curse them. Hunters respect them. Most people think of them as shy animals that bolt at human scent. That's mostly true. Mostly. I stood there longer than necessary, studying the impressions. They were large. A heavy animal. Maybe over 100 kilos. I scanned the trees automatically, the way I used to scan rooftops in Kabul. No movement, no sound, just wind brushing the canopy. I told myself not to be dramatic. Boars avoid people. I had crossed paths with them before, seen them dart through underbrush like shadows with bristles. Still, I adjusted my route. Instead of following the stream deeper into the valley, I angled uphill toward a ridge I knew well. Higher ground offers better visibility. Another old habit. The incline forced my lungs to work harder. My breath fogged in front of me. The soil became rockier, scattered with roots that twisted like veins across the earth. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called. Then another answered. And then the forest went quiet. Not silent. Forests are never truly silent, but subdued, like something had pressed a palm against its mouth. I stopped walking. There's a difference between imagination and instinct. I've spent decades learning to separate the two. Imagination is chaotic, loud, full of worst-case scenarios. Instinct is clean, simple. Instinct told me I was not alone. I turned slowly, scanning left to right, my ears strained. I caught it then, a faint rustle. Not wind, heavier, rhythmic, something pushing through brush with weight behind it. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Not panic, alertness. Easy, I muttered to myself. You've handled worse. But that was arrogance speaking. The sound came again, closer this time. A low, guttural grunt followed. deep, vibrating. It didn't sound like fear. It sounded like irritation. I spotted movement about 20 meters downslope, dark shape between trunks, low to the ground. Then it stepped into a narrow beam of light breaking through the canopy. The boar was massive. Thick shoulders, coarse black bristles standing upright along its spine. Mud caked on its flanks. Its head was broad, triangular, with small eyes that reflected dull amber in the filtered light. Two curved tusks protruded from its lower jaw, yellowed and sharp. It wasn't running away. It was staring at me. Time stretches in moments like that. I remember thinking absurdly about how quiet my boots were, how the fog seemed to curl around its legs. Then I saw the movement behind it. Smaller shapes, 3 of them, piglets, and in that instant everything rearranged itself in my mind. A sow with young. I had walked between her and whatever direction she considered safe. To her, I wasn't a hiker. I was a threat. I raised my hands slowly, palms outward. I spoke in a low, calm voice. Gons Rui. Rui. Back away. No sudden movements. Don't run. Create space. I took one slow step backward uphill. The boar's head lowered slightly. Another step. It charged. I've heard artillery. I've heard vehicles explode, but the sound of 200 kilos of muscle tearing through underbrush directly at you. That is a different kind of terror. It's raw, immediate. There's no time to intellectualize. She covered the distance faster than I believed possible. Her hooves tore into the soil, flinging leaves. The ground seemed to shake. I pivoted to the side at the last second. A reflex drilled into me from decades of combat training. Never stay in the line of attack. The boar brushed past my leg with shocking force. Her shoulder slammed into my thigh, and I felt something twist painfully. I stumbled but didn't fall. She wheeled around instantly. Boars don't bluff charge. When they commit fully. I grabbed my walking stick and thrust it forward as she lunged again. The stick struck her snout, not hard enough to injure, but enough to deflect her aim slightly. I felt the impact reverberate up my arms. She let out a piercing squeal that ripped through the trees. Then the tusk caught me. A white-hot line of pain exploded across my left calf. It felt like being sliced by heated wire. I fell backward onto the damp forest floor. The smell of soil and decay filled my nose. My breath left me in a violent rush. I rolled instinctively as she lunged again, and her tusks tore through the fabric of my jacket instead of my abdomen. I heard the rip, felt cold air against my skin. Training took over. Do not freeze. Protect the neck. Protect the femoral arteries. I curled slightly, using my rucksack as partial padding against my back. When she charged again, I kicked outward with my right boot, aiming for the sensitive snout and eyes. My heel connected with bone. She recoiled just enough. I scrambled to my knees, blood soaking into my sock. The pain in my leg was blinding, but I forced myself not to look at it. Looking makes it real. Real makes you hesitate. She came again, head low, tusks forward. This time I didn't try to sidestep. I grabbed a fallen branch thicker than my arm and held it horizontally like a barrier. When she hit it, the impact nearly ripped it from my hands. But it jammed between her tusks for a split second. That second was everything. I pivoted uphill, scrambling toward a cluster of rocks about 5 meters away. Higher ground. Obstacle between us. My boots slipped on wet leaves. I could hear her behind me, snorting, crashing, relentless. I reached the rocks and hauled myself onto the largest one, ignoring the tearing pain in my calf. The elevation was barely waist-high, but it changed the angle. When she lunged again, her tusks scraped against stone instead of flesh. Sparks flashed briefly. She circled, furious. Foam flecked her mouth. The piglets had retreated into brush, but she was focused entirely on me now. I stood on that rock, heart hammering so hard I thought I might black out. My breathing was ragged. My leg trembled, blood running down into my boot. She charged the rock again, trying to climb. I used the branch to strike downward at her snout repeatedly. Not wildly, controlled, aimed. Each strike bought me half a second. I reached for my whistle with my free hand and blew as hard as I could. The sound pierced the forest. High, unnatural, shrill. She flinched, just slightly. I blew again and again. Boars aren't afraid of much, but sudden piercing noises can disorient them. Combined with the elevated position and resistance, it began to shift the balance. After what felt like hours, but was likely less than a minute, she hesitated. Her ears twitched. She glanced back toward the brush where her piglets waited. I seized the moment and shouted, deep from the diaphragm, the kind of roar I used to command recruits. Raw, aggressive, dominant. For a heartbeat, we stared at each other. Then she backed away. Not running, just retreating step by step, still facing me. Finally, she turned and crashed into the undergrowth, vanishing as suddenly as she had appeared. The forest swallowed the sound, and I was alone. I stayed on that rock for several minutes, shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline crash hit hard. My hands felt numb. My vision narrowed. Then the pain returned in full. I looked down at my leg. The tusk had sliced a deep diagonal gash along my calf. Not an artery, thank God, but deep enough that muscle tissue showed beneath torn fabric. Blood pulsed steadily, not spurting. That was good. Spurting would have meant I'd have minutes. I forced myself into procedure mode. Pressure first. I tore a strip from the inner lining of my jacket and pressed it firmly against the wound. I elevated the leg slightly on the rock surface. My hands were slippery with blood, but training kept them steady. Clean later. Stop bleeding now. After several minutes of sustained pressure, the flow slowed. I wrapped the makeshift bandage tightly, then reinforced it with gauze from my first aid kit. Standing was agony, but staying wasn't an option. I checked my abdomen and torso for additional wounds. The torn jacket had saved me. Superficial scratches, no deep punctures. I blew the whistle one more time, just in case, then began the slow descent back toward the main trail. Each step sent a sharp pulse up my leg. I used the walking stick like a crutch, leaning heavily on it. The forest seemed different now, no longer peaceful. Every shadow felt alive. Every crack of a twig made my heart spike. It took me nearly an hour to reach the trailhead. By then, I was pale, sweating despite the cold. A passing cyclist saw me limping and immediately stopped. I must have looked like something dragged out of a war zone. At the hospital in Freiburg, they stitched the wound. 22 stitches. The doctor told me I was lucky. A few centimeters higher, and I might have lost a leg. Or worse. Lucky. I've thought about that word a lot since. People assume survival is about strength, about bravery. It's not. It's about awareness, respect, understanding that nature doesn't negotiate. That So wasn't evil. She wasn't malicious. She was protecting her young. I stepped into her world and misjudged the situation. In the military, we say complacency kills. In the forest, it mauls. What saved me wasn't aggression. It was positioning, elevation, using obstacles, protecting vital arteries, creating noise, staying conscious through pain, and, perhaps most importantly, refusing to freeze. When I close my eyes now, I still hear the thunder of her charge. I still smell the wet earth as I hit the ground. I still feel the heat of her breath inches from my face. I go back to the forest, yes, but differently. I watch the ground more carefully. I avoid dense underbrush during breeding seasons. I give every track the respect it deserves. At 60, I learned something the Army never fully taught me. In war, you fight an enemy who thinks. In the wild, you survive an animal who doesn't need to. And that makes it far more honest. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Preparation matters, but humility matters more. The wilderness does not care about your medals, your rank, or your past victories. It only responds to what you do in the moment when two eyes lock onto yours from the shadows. That day, I walked into the Black Forest believing I was experienced. I walked out understanding I was simply human, and that made all the difference.